Well, after spending the year in the book of Acts, we've come to the conclusion of that, but I'm just not quite ready to let go. And so last week, while we looked at the last few verses of the book of Acts, it's sometimes a little bit frustrating. And here's why. The book of Acts just ends abruptly. In fact, not just abruptly, but really I'd use the word unresolved. There's this tension about, okay, what happened to Paul, right? Paul's in prison, and that's how the book ends. It's kind of like one of my pet peeves, I guess, is to sit down and watch a television show, not knowing that it's one of those shows that you watch the show and you get really into it, and when the final screen appears, it says, "To be continued," right? I hate that. But here's the problem. That's how the book of Acts ends. In fact, we can read the last two verses of the book of Acts, and notice the unresolved tension. It just simply says, 2 years, Paul stayed there in his own rented house. Now remember, it's a rented house, but he's chained, short-linked, he's handcuffed to a Roman soldier. And yet, even while he's there in this self-rented house, this prison, people are coming. And he's boldly and without hindrance proclaiming the kingdom of God and teaching people about Jesus Christ. But the book ends, and at least I want to say, what happened to Paul? He's in jail. He's waiting to face Nero, and yet the book of Acts does not tell us. We know he's there for 2 years, and then it just ends. Now, we know why. You see, by the time that Luke finishes writing the book of Acts, Paul's still in prison. And so it's brought us to the end of the story. And we've also speculated, among other things, that the book of Acts was written to Paul's defense attorney, who was going to use this information to help clear Paul's name. But we get to the end of the book here, and we're saying, okay, what happened to Paul? Now, I did tell you something, that Paul, while he's in prison, in fact, you might even want to write these words at the end of the book of Acts. You might want to write the words Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. We call those prison epistles because we know during that 2-year time period, Paul writes those books. And so while we don't have a conclusion really to the book of Acts, and some people even speculate that maybe Luke planned on writing a third volume, but for whatever reason was prevented from doing so, while we don't get that, what we do get is some information in those prison epistles about what might happen. Now, I've got to tell you what we're going to do today. I'm going to try to fill in the rest of the story, and to do this, we've got to do some sleuthing. We've got to do some investigating. We've also got to do a little bit of speculation. We've also got to look to some church history to find out exactly what happened to Paul, but that's what I want to do. You see, during those times in prison, as Paul wrote those prison epistles, we do get some clues about what's going on. In fact, we get this, for example, in the book of Philippians. Paul's writing a letter from prison, and he tells the people in Philippi that, hey, I want to send Timothy to you, and I'm confident in the Lord that I myself will soon come to you. And so as he's in prison, as he's writing, he realizes that it's in all likelihood he's going to be released, and he's hoping to go there to visit them in Philippi. He's going to send Timothy right away, and soon after that, he's hoping to come. And so we realize that he's expecting to be released, which brings us to the question, okay, what really did happen? And we do know that Paul is released from prison. There's some people who believe that Paul actually stands trial before Nero, and because there's really not any evidence to convict him, Nero lets him go. There's other people, and I think I land here, other people say a statute of limitations actually expires. There's a time period where people have to bring their charges against Paul, and no one shows up from Jerusalem. And so in the light of no one showing up during that statute of limitations, when that expires, Paul's released. But what we do know is that Paul is released from prison. And again, during those prison epistles, we get other clues. Not only does he want to go to Philippi, but we find several times mentioned throughout those books that Paul wants to take the gospel other places. Those places include not only Philippi and in Macedonia, but also Greece. We also know we've read portions from the book of Romans throughout our studies. We know in the book of Romans that he tells the people in Spain that he wants to come and visit them, or he tells the people in Rome that he wants to go and visit Spain. And so we can actually learn about what Paul intends to do, but we can even go one step better than that. We can take another couple books that Paul writes, the book of 1 Timothy and Titus, and we can find out some places where he actually did go. And what we find out is actually, outside of the book of Acts, there is a fourth missionary journey. And so that's what I want to do. I want to complete the book of Acts by telling you a little bit about this fourth missionary journey. And to do that, we need to turn to the book of Titus, because in the book of Titus, we see Paul writing about some of his travels. And so notice, for example, Titus chapter 1, verse 5. He's writing to Titus, the reason I left you in Crete. Now, if he left Titus in Crete, that does presuppose something, right? That Paul actually makes it again to Crete with Titus. And so we know that he goes to Crete, and that you might straighten out what was left and finish and appoint elders in every town as I directed you. Then he writes this to Titus, do your best to come to me at Nicopolis, which again presupposes he makes it somewhere else, right? He makes it there in Greece, and he tells Titus, come meet him there. And so we realize that he does go, and he even writes back some letters saying, here's where I've been and here's where I'm going. So he does that. We also learn from church history that he plans to go elsewhere and probably does. In fact, Clement, who's called Clement of Rome because he was the bishop of Rome, he writes this, that Paul traveled to Spain as he intended and what he wanted to do in the book of Romans. And he went to Spain, and then after that he goes back to Rome where he's going to encounter Nero. And so if I was going to show you this fourth missionary journey, as I've done with the first three, it looks like this. He's up here in Rome. When he's released from prison, he's going to come down to Crete, and from Crete he's going to train Titus and say, look, you need to train church leaders there. He's going to go up here and tell Titus, come meet me. And then after that, if Clement's right, he does make it all the way to Spain. He ministers in Spain and then goes back to Rome where he encounters Nero. Now, what's interesting is Nero at first, we think of Nero and we think of this terrible guy. And he does become that. But actually at first, Nero was a pretty good ruler. He initially ruled fairly well, but there's something that happens that turns him forcibly against Christianity. It happened, actually, we know the precise date, July 19th, 64. Now, not 1964, just in case you're confused. This is 64. But do you remember what happened, actually, in 64? Rome burned. There's all kinds of stories about what happened and why it happened, but we know this for sure. The city of Rome burned. In fact, it burned for 5 days. Now, there are 14 districts in Rome. 3 of those districts were completely destroyed, burned clear to the ground, and 7 others were so damaged that people couldn't live there anymore. And so really 10 of the 14 districts of Rome were completely burned. And there's all kinds of legends about what happened. Everything from a cow kicking over a lantern to Nero himself lighting a fire to Nero hiring somebody else to light the fire. There's also a legend most of us heard that while Rome burnt, Nero was doing something. He was playing his fiddle. Well, that's all legend and speculation. We do know this, that the city of Rome burnt. We also know that after Rome burned, Nero blames it on the Christians, and there's fierce persecution that breaks out. And so after this date, what follows is not a legend, that there is fierce persecution. And you can read a book, for example, like Fox's Book of Martyrs, and he's going to write this, that an incredible number of Christians were tormented and slain, that the cities of Italy, their cities were full of bodies, both young and old, naked, laying on the streets because of open persecution against Christians. And we know this. It's during this time when fierce persecution breaks out against the Christians that Paul actually returns to Rome. And when he gets there, he's rearrested and he's imprisoned. At this time, there are no charges needed. You see, there's persecution going against all Christians. And there's plenty of people who want to gain favor with Nero that probably just turn Paul in. Hey, here's one of those leaders of those Christians. And so he's arrested. This time he's arrested. He's not able to rent his own private quarters and chained to a Roman guard. This time he's thrown in a dungeon. And you can actually go and visit this dungeon. It's the Mamertine prison in Rome. I've got a couple pictures here to show you, and we see this kind of dungy courtyard, but also we see there in that picture, we see a hole in the ground. This is actually the place where the prisoners were let down. It was an old cistern, and that was the prison, and this is where Paul is going to live out the rest of his life, in this hole in the ground, in this abandoned cistern. And it's there during this second imprisonment in the Mamertine prison that Paul isn't finished yet. In fact, it's here in the prison that he writes a book. By the way, during the time he was in prison the first time, he wrote Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, Philemon. Those are the prison epistles. During the time that he's out of prison, while he's out on his fourth missionary journey, he writes a couple books, and we can read those books and find out about his travels. 1 Timothy and the book we read, the book of Titus. 1 Timothy and Titus. He comes back and he's in prison. He's here in this dungeon. He again takes out his pen and he writes one more book. Anybody guess? We have 1 Timothy and the book of Titus. It's during that time in prison that he writes another book. It's the book of 2 Timothy. And so it's there while he's in that dungeon that happens. And it's interesting that as we go and we read that book that he writes, this book 2 Timothy, we read it as we read that book that he's already spent at least a winter in that dungeon. We know that he's suffered greatly from the cold, and he, even as he writes, asks that a cloak may be brought to him because it's cold there, and he's expecting a second winter. He writes in this book that he feels abandoned and deserted. Only Luke has been faithful to come and visit him, and all the people in Rome, they're hiding. All the Christians there are hiding because of the persecution that's going on. Well, he hopes that they'll bring him a cloak. He's hoping that Timothy and Mark will come visit him again, and he knows he's going to die, and yet during that time, he's not afraid. In fact, what's interesting, I told you it's an abandoned cistern. During the winter months when the water table starts getting high, there's water that actually comes up in that cistern, and the prisoners there actually had to stand in water to survive. Many of them died because the water even drowned. And it's interesting, while Paul's in prison, history recounts for us that every time the water table started getting high, he used that as an opportunity to baptize the converts which he'd brought to Christ. Isn't that great? In prison, in this dungeon, he's baptizing people in the water he's standing in. Well, as he writes that book, the book of 2 Timothy, it really becomes, if you will, his last will and testament. And it's during that book, not only that we find out what it's like, he's going to write, and he's really going to turn over his ministry. He's already written a book to Titus about what Titus should do. And here in 2 Timothy, in this last will and testament, he turns his ministry over to Timothy. In fact, in that book, you're going to hear language like, hey, my son. And he's going to give final instructions. And 2 Timothy becomes this very candid book about what ministry looks like and even about the dangers of ministry. And in this book, he's going to name names and he's going to give strong warnings. And he's going to tell Timothy, here's what ministry is like. Here's what leaders look like. And he writes lists, for example, of what leaders in the church should look like. And he also gives some very strong warnings. But what you need to know is that book of 2 Timothy, the book of 2 Timothy becomes the last words of the Apostle Paul. They're his last written words. In fact, it's during this time that Paul is going to be killed. And so what I'd like to do for you as we kind of conclude the book of Acts, I'd like to jump ahead to those very last words and find out what happened while Paul was in prison. And I'd like to read portions of 2 Timothy for you because we find, if you will, Paul's final journey. Now, this is not a missionary journey. This really is his final journey. So, if we're going to read Paul's last words, 2 Timothy, if we're going to read the last of Paul's last words, we're going to go to the end of the book, right? So I want to take you clear to the end of 2 Timothy, and I want to show you chapter 4. And here's what we see as Paul writes. We see, I'm being poured out like a drink offering. The time has come for my departure. Now understand, this is not a departure from prison, right? This is a departure from life, and we get that in context. I've fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also all who have longed for his appearing. We see Paul actually becoming freely sentimental. And he uses phrases that we've heard. I've fought the good fight. I've run the race. He's being poured out like this sacrifice. In fact, he uses the language of a drink offering. That's some Old Testament symbolism of the sacrificial system. He says, my life has been a drink offering. He knows that death is imminent. His life is being poured out. And we hear those familiar words. I want you to stop and examine those for a second, that he has ran the race, he's fought the fight, he's kept the faith. He uses more imagery, not just that of a sacrificial system, but notice the metaphors he uses. They're ones that tell us life's hard. I mean, think about this. He's fought the fight. That's war language, right? He's ran the race, and you need to understand this language. It's not a sprint. This language is It's the marathon. And so he's using illustrations of the sacrificial system. His life is being poured out. He's fought the fight. He's ran the race, and he's kept the faith. Well, we realize Paul's state of mind, and during this time, he really is freely sentimental. But then what happens next is rather interesting. He's gonna lay out the dangers of ministry. And in this next little part, he's not sentimental anymore. He's actually honestly candid. And I want you to notice as we get down here and we pick up the story again in verse 9, here's what we read. Do your best to come to me quickly, for Demas, because he loved this world, has deserted me and has gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. Greet Mark and bring him with you, because he's helpful to me in my ministry. I sent Tychicus to Ephesus. When you come back, bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas and my scrolls, especially the parchments. Alexander, the metal worker, he's done a great deal of harm. The Lord will repay him for what he's done. You too should be on your guard against him, because he strongly opposed our message. At my first offense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. May it not be held against them. Paul's in prison. Now he's saying, I've fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. But as he writes to Timothy, as he's passing his ministry on to them, he's really warning them, watch out, because ministry's tough. Look, some of the people that were even partners with me in ministry, when life got really tough, they abandoned me. Now, there are a few that are faithful, but many of them, they've deserted him, and he really does name names. Let me just point out a few. I'm going to back up to chapter 1, verse 15. We get two guys that have deserted him. We get Phygellus and Hermogenes. Now, that's not milk. That's homogenized. Different thing, okay? But we get Demas. Now, Demas, we can read in some of the epistles, was actually a partner with Paul in ministry, and yet he abandons Paul, and not only that, says he loved the world more than the gospel. We get Alexander, this metal worker who did a great deal of harm, and he even says, watch out for him, because he's going to cause you trouble too. And basically he says, everyone's deserted me. Now, there's some people he sent off in ministry, like Titus and Timothy, but many of the people that were partners with Paul, they have deserted him. And Paul, as he comes to the end of the letter, he actually says, I want you to understand what ministry is like. These people have deserted me. And so he begins sentimental. Hey, I've fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. But watch out, because ministry is tough. And the very same people that have caused me trouble, they're going to cause you trouble as well. And he's honestly candid with them. And then we come to the very last words. In the very last words of Paul. We come and he's resolutely hopeful. And notice as he concludes this book, he writes these words, the Lord has stood at my side. He gave me strength, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed, all the Gentiles might hear it. I was delivered from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and will bring me safely where? He's not saying he's going to be released from prison. He's not saying that he's going to be released from some problem here on earth. He actually says he'll bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. To him be the glory forever and ever. Amen. There are two interesting phrases there. I've underlined them for you. But first of all, we get this phrase, the Lord gave me strength. And it's just curious, because actually we know, is he looking back and saying, at tough times like this, God's always given me strength? We know a couple times that God actually appeared to him. We remember, for example, when he was first arrested back in Jerusalem, that an angel came and gave him this message. Look, like you preached in Jerusalem, you'll be able to preach in Rome, and so don't be afraid. We get another time when Paul is actually sailing from what we call Israel, trying to make his way towards Rome to stand trial. We remember that there's this big hurricane, and they get blown off target. It's during that time where they're lost at sea that, again, God comes to him and says, you will not die. In fact, everybody that's with you, they'll be safely rescued. And so we know a couple times before that God really did stand at his side. Now, we don't know if he's just referring to those, hey, during tough times, the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength. Even now he gives me strength. Or maybe we get God appearing to him again, even in the Roman prison. We don't know, but we do know this. He's strengthened because God has been with him. And I want to tell you, we've got the same promise. We're not promised that we'll be freed from hardship. But we are promised that Jesus will never forsake us or abandon us, that no matter what we go through, he'll be with us through thick and thin. And there's a second interesting phrase, and the reason why this is interesting is because he uses language saying that he's been delivered from the lion's mouth. Well, what kind of delivery are we talking about? He's going to die. And really in the first century, lion's mouth It was a symbol of strength, much like it would be today, but it's imagery of supreme strength. And most people think he's probably referring to Nero, and yet we know this. Actually, Paul's going to die, and it's Nero who's going to give the command. And so how has he been delivered? But his delivery is not to an earthly kingdom. His delivery is not from an earthly prison. His delivery is not from death. He actually uses this language. I will be delivered. In fact, I have been delivered, but I've been delivered to a heavenly kingdom. And we realize that Paul realizes that ultimately deliverance from pain and suffering might not even happen on this side of heaven. We realize Paul, as he writes, he's saying us that he's not going to be delivered from Nero's hands, but he's going to be delivered safely home to a heavenly kingdom. And as we read Paul's last words, we realize that even in death, he remains a committed follower of Jesus. Well, again, according to this bishop of Rome named Clement, or we can read about another bishop. He's actually the bishop of Corinth, where Paul preached. His name's Eusebius. They both write about the end of Paul's days. In fact, here's what's interesting. Paul, again, he was rearrested and put in prison there in Rome. Somebody else is arrested during that same time, according to these two bishops. Not only was Paul arrested, but Peter himself was arrested. And what's interesting is Peter only briefly makes it to Rome. It's not, as some churches might say, that he set up residence there and anyway, he's not Pope. But he makes it back to Rome too briefly. He's arrested. He's put in that same prison. And we get evidence about that. And we also learn this, that both of them are killed about the same time. Now, Tertullian, he gives us more of a picture. He again tells us about Rome and about them being arrested in Rome. But he tells us about Paul specifically. And according to Tertullian, he says that Paul this time does come and stand before Nero, and Nero pronounces judgment on him, sends Paul back to jail. And then here's what happens. We actually get two soldiers, and he even gives us the name of these soldiers, Phrygia and Parthenius. And what's interesting, these two soldiers who are actually ordered to carry out Paul's execution, as they come to Paul, they ask Paul to pray for them. And he does. And they ask Paul, hey, what should we do? And Paul says this, you need to go and you need to be baptized and you need to be committed followers of Jesus Christ. And they do, and yet they come back and they reluctantly execute Paul. It happens in 68 AD. What's interesting is, as a Roman citizen, Paul is not crucified. Now remember, Jesus was crucified. We also know that Peter was crucified. And in fact, Peter's last words appear to be this, his last request, if you will. When you crucify me, hang me upside down, because I do not want to be crucified in the same manner as my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And so Peter is crucified upside down. But since Paul is a Roman citizen, crucifixion was for the worst and vilest of criminals. Paul's a Roman citizen. He was not crucified. Actually, Paul was beheaded by the sword, and he died on the Ostian Road just outside of Rome. And so we actually see that Paul's words are true, that he is poured out like a drink offering, and he is delivered to his heavenly kingdom. And that's the rest of the story. And you might say, okay, well, why would we even spend our time on that? Okay, interesting. We got a couple things. We now know when Ephesians and Philippians and Colossians and Philemon were written. We know those books were written during Paul's first imprisonment. We also know, and you could go write this in 1 Timothy or Titus, that right in those chapters, that 1 Timothy and Titus were actually written during his fourth missionary journey, if you will. And really, you could even put Macedonia on there, because Paul even mentions the place where Timothy's supposed to come and meet him. That's where he writes Timothy and the book of Titus. We also know this, that it's in that dungeon that Paul writes 2 Timothy. And so that's helpful. But I want to stop and I want to bring this home. And here's why I want to tell you the rest of the story. Because we learn some things about the Apostle Paul, that he is faithful even in death. And I want to bring it to a point of application, and here's the first thing I want to tell you. First of all, notice where Paul is delivered to. And you need to realize this, that this is not our true home. We're not citizens of an earthly kingdom. Our king is not an earthly king. You see, our citizenship is in heaven. We need to realize our true home. We are not citizens of an earthly kingdom, but we live and we expect to be delivered to a heavenly kingdom. If that's true, where should our focus be? It's not here on the here and now. we need to realize we're citizens of a heavenly kingdom. And Paul's got that figured out, and so he's faithful even in death. But not only should we realize our true home, I want you to notice these words. I want you to notice Paul. He's found faithful. I want to tell you that's my goal. See, the words that I want to hear, I bet you do too, when I see my Savior face to face, I want to hear these words. Well done, good and faithful servant. And with the Apostle Paul, I want to be able to stand up and say, I've fought the good fight. I've ran the race. I have kept the faith. And we realize that's a testimony to Paul's life. No matter what he went through, he was faithful. Even in prison, even being beaten, even being shipwrecked, even in death, Paul is faithful. I want to tell you that's our battle cry too, that no matter what happens in good times and bad times, we need to remain faithful. Because this is not our home, and delivery may not be in this kingdom. It may be in the next kingdom. Which just brings me to one final point, which really is an outcropping of that last one. You know, as I look at people that have most impacted me, among the people that are the most committed Christians, the reason why they've impacted me, it's not because their life has been easy. It's not because they've been delivered. Actually, the people that have impacted, many of the people that have impacted me most are the ones that have been faithful even amidst suffering and hardship. Of those who have most influenced my life, they've been faithful during the hard times. And that's what's been such an impact. In fact, most of those people that we look at and we say, man, they're models of integrity. They're models of virtue. They're people that have been even in hard times, they've been faithfully following Jesus. You see, actually the thing that made them models of integrity and the thing that made them models of virtue and the thing that made them these people of outstanding character were the hardships in their life, where even during those times, they were firmly committed to Jesus Christ. And I just want to stop and say, what if the very things in life that we think are so painful, what if the very things in life that are hardships for us, that are miserable to go through, what if those are the very things that are actually helping us and preparing us to be molded and shaped into the image of Jesus Christ? What if it's actually during those times that we are most effective in reaching other people for Jesus Christ? Good things or bad things? If they're the very things that knock off the rough edges and mold us and shape us into the character of Jesus Christ, I've got to stop and say, those maybe are good things, especially if they're preparing us for our citizenship not here, but our citizenship in heaven. You see, Paul ends up losing his life because of his faith in Jesus Christ. And I just want to close with the words of another missionary who actually, he loses his life because of faith in Christ. His name's Jim Elliot. And Jim Elliot simply writes these words, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." Would you pray with me? Father, we want to come before you, and I just want to say thank you for the life and testimony of one like the Apostle Paul, who no matter what comes his way, he's found faithful, that through trials and tribulation, in hardship, in sickness, in a stoning, in prison, in a shipwreck, and even facing death, he can say the words, I've fought the fight, I've run the race, I've kept the faith. Father, help those words be true of us. And Father, help us be found faithful no matter what. And that's our prayer. We pray this in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus. Amen.